Great, so people are coming in, but I think what we'll do is go ahead and start the meeting, the webinar now. And probably we'll just do some introductions, and I think this will give some people more time to start coming in. So thank you everybody for joining us for this webinar on, this is our second Global Careers panel today. I think we have a great couple panelists that I hope you'll enjoy learning about their stories and their careers, and hopefully you'll be able to take one or two ideas away from them about how you can advance your career and also advance a career that is global. So I'm going to start by first just going over some ground rules. So first of all, everybody, your videos should be off and your microphones should be muted. And when we're not speaking, I'm going to make sure to turn my microphone off. So just as a reminder to the panelists too and to myself, so that way it'll keep background sounds to a minimum. If you want to ask a question, there will be chances to ask questions at the end. You also had a lot of great questions in the registration, and I've made some note of those. So we'll be able to go over those at the end as well if we have some time. And questions can be asked through the chat box. And also, if you would like to sign, if you'd like, our interpreter is Audrey. You can see it's, I believe her title is ASL Audrey if you look in the participants list. And if you would like her to voice your answer, you also I believe you can make a request in the chat box. Just say, maybe request, I think Monica will be able to help you with that. Monica is our project manager, and she's also helping out here with technical support. In addition to interpretation, this webinar is also captioned, and there is a link in the chat box to the live captions. We're not using the Zoom captions here. We are using a caption stream. So if you click on the link, and the link would also be in your confirmation email, although it just was sent to the chat box. I think we had some technical difficulties though with the reminder emails that went out yesterday. So if you didn't get one, I apologize. But if you did, that would also have a link to the captions in it. And the transcript will be made available after, and I believe along with the recording of the webinar too. So, so this will be for posterity. Now, this is a webinar on. This webinar is provided by the National Clearinghouse on Disability and Exchange. The National Clearinghouse on Disability and Exchange, just to read our attestation language on the slide here, it says, the National Clearinghouse on Disability and Exchange is a project of the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, designed to increase the participation of people with disabilities in international exchange between the United States and other countries, and it's supported in its implementation by Mobility International USA, MIUSA. And MIUSA is a disability-led nonprofit organization that is dedicated to advancing the rights and leadership of people with disabilities globally. Now, to explain a little bit more about our attestation, because it can be a little bit vague, what exactly does NCDE do? So NCDE, our goal is to see more people with disabilities studying abroad, volunteering abroad, interning abroad, and of course, in this case, seeking more global careers. We want to see more people with disabilities representing the United States abroad and showing people abroad that, you know, Americans, we are a diverse people, including people with diverse abilities. We also want to see more internationals having the opportunity to learn more about the United States and our unique disability culture and history. And how do we increase the participation of people with disabilities in international exchange? We do it by providing information. We're mainly a clearinghouse. We have an online collection of resources at www.miusa.org, including tip sheets, personal stories, best practices, webinars like this one, the A World Awaits You Away magazine publication. We have a video series called Passport to Possibilities. We also have about, I believe, 4 seasons of our Ripple Effects Access to Exchange podcast. And we're always adding new resources all the time. You can subscribe to our newsletter to be notified when new resources are posted. We also always are offering new workshops like this one. And one thing we do not do is offer programs directly. So I think that's a really common misconception is people think, oh, you want to increase disabled people studying abroad, therefore you offer programs, and we don't. We consult on access. We advise people with disabilities on how to study abroad, how to deal with maybe exchange program doubts about their disabilities, how to negotiate accommodations. We also spend a lot of time advising professionals in the exchange field and also disability practitioners. I believe there's a lot of them on this call, and on how to more effectively support people with disabilities in study abroad programs. So that way, hopefully, our hope is that more quote unquote mainstream programs, for lack of a better word, will become more welcoming to people with disabilities, and therefore more people with disabilities will feel empowered to study or volunteer abroad. Now, and the next order of business is to explain what is global careers. You know, one of the questions was what global careers are. I think kind of for the purpose of this webinar, I think about a global career as either three things. Either A, your job involves international travel. B, your job involves working with people from different cultural backgrounds. Or C, your job requires a knowledge of international affairs. So that's going to be kind of what we go off of here when we talk about global careers. And you can listen to our other global careers panel that we did earlier in February. And also, I believe our goal is to offer at least one more panel later this year. And that's going to be kind of our yardstick for measuring what is a global career exactly. Now, on this next slide, of course, you can see our wonderful presenters, Jessica Rafuse of Microsoft and Robert Gould of the University of Illinois. And I think now we're gonna go ahead and just start the discussion here. And on the first slide, I just want to see if our panelists can start by just telling us a little bit about yourself, kind of what makes you tick, what's your cause, and we'll go ahead and start with Jessica.
Hey folks, I'm Jessica Rafuse from Microsoft. Thanks for the introduction, Justin. A few things about myself. Well, I am a mom, a wife, a dog fanatic. I have 2 Australian Shepherds who have been very involved in my conference calls since we've all been working from home, so they might pop by and scream at us, and I apologize. I have 2 little boys, Spencer and Harrison. They also could pop by, but we've sent them outside with some water balloons, so hopefully they are captivated out there. I have muscular dystrophy. I've used a power wheelchair for about 20 years since I was in college. And I think, you know, the reason why I'm on this call, or maybe more importantly, really a watershed moment in my life, was when I studied abroad in Spain during college.
Thanks, Jessica. Thank you so much for being with us. And Robert.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Rob, and Justin, is this coming through clearly? Is that
yes,
okay? Okay,
perfect.
I'm presenting to you from the inside of my bedroom closet, which has become my makeshift pandemic office for the last couple months now. I'm from Chicago. I've lived here almost my entire life, with a couple of stints in the great state of Iowa. I'm a dad and a husband. I have a 3-year-old daughter and a feisty 6-year-old black lab mix named Ruby. I've strategically joined this webinar around nap time, so hopefully I'll be able to join clearly for the duration of it. I also identify as a disabled person. I have chronic asthma, and I'm a user of mental health services and supports, currently celebrating my 15th year of access to the service system. And I'm sharing this not really to claim any specific expertise or knowledge about these conditions, and definitely not any ability to talk about other people's experiences. But in my field, I'm an academic in disability studies. We often talk about how our relationship with disability shapes our approach to research and teaching. And what makes disability studies different than just studying disability in general is that our approach includes the voice of people with disabilities when we talk about the complex personal, cultural, historical, political, and I'm sure I'm missing some descriptors there, but the various factors that make up what we commonly call disability. So thank you, Justin, and thank you, Jessica, and very nice to be here.
Thank you. And now on the next slide, why don't we start by talking about what is kind of your work and why don't we go back to Jessica and have you kind of go into that a little bit. Tell us about the work that you do for Microsoft globally.
Well, I'll tell a little story, and it starts back long before Microsoft. I am an attorney, an administrative judge in a past life for the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission for the federal government. I made my way to Microsoft while I was working at Starbucks. I was working as an employment attorney, and I was leading an employee resource group for people with disabilities. And I started working and networking. Here's a little tip to write down, networking with others in the field. And I met Microsoft's Chief Accessibility Officer. And at that time, we were really just benchmarking, talking about our work, talking about how we could together empower people with disabilities. And when she was promoted to her position, she called me up and asked if I wanted to come work for her. And that was 4 years ago on the 16th, actually, of May. So I just celebrated my 4-year anniversary at Microsoft, where I'm responsible for strategic partnerships within our accessibility team. So across all of Microsoft, I work with organizations who focus on people with disabilities. I take that information, the feedback that those organizations can provide, and I bring it back into the company. And we use the feedback from people with disabilities to make our products, our services, our websites, and our company culture more inclusive to people with disabilities. The mission at Microsoft is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. And I mention that because the on the planet part is really what we're talking about today. That is my global reach. Really extending across the whole globe to ensure that we're doing just that, empowering people and organizations, including people with disabilities, to achieve more.
Thank you, Jessica. What about you, Rob?
Sure. So my work, I've always been informed by kind of the practical side of things. As I mentioned, I'm a researcher in disability studies now, but I've had, kind of the full gamut of jobs in disability services. I've been a direct support professional. I've been a vocational rehab specialist, a job coach, and even worked for the Office for Diversity at the American Library Association for a while. And this all kind of shared my journey towards academia, where not only do I get to share my experience with disability, but I continue to be a lifelong learner in disability studies. I teach in our Department of Disability and Human Development at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And I teach in our undergraduate and graduate degree programs in disability. I teach mostly on courses on disability rights and culture, as well as disability and world cultures. On the research side of things, I'm the director of research for what's called the Great Lakes ADA Center. ADA, of course, standing for the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's one of 10 regional technical assistance centers based in our department that has a collective goal of advancing voluntary compliance with disability civil rights laws. So at its core, we're trying to get folks on board with the message of disability rights, both in the legal side of things, but also to embrace the spirit of the law, trying to promote a culture of inclusion across the US. My specific research interests are on the implementation of law and policy, especially as it relates to the employment of people with disabilities. I think that's about enough for me.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, and I mean, I remember you wrote a paper about a disability policy in the Czech Republic, and it was definitely a lot of really interesting global reach there with that research. I wonder if let's go back now, Jessica. We'll talk about any international experiences that you've had before, and I think you kind of hinted at your study abroad in Spain, and maybe a little more about that and how that impacted where you're at now in your career.
Yeah, like I'm imagining many people on the call today have had those moments, those study abroad experiences that we can now look back on years later and really point to as a defining moment in my career, but also my personal life. It was difficult, like many of you know, to study abroad using a wheelchair. But those challenges that I faced really defined who I was. When I first talked to my university about studying abroad, I went to the study abroad office and they said, "Oh no, you can't study abroad." So I called the offices in Spain and I said, "I want to study abroad." And they said, "Oh no, you can't study abroad in Spain, far too difficult." And when I went to my family, they said, "No, don't go. We don't want you to go anywhere." So I didn't have a lot of support at that time to live this dream that I wanted to, which was really immerse myself in the Spanish culture, in the Spanish language. And that's when I was connected with Mayusa. And I really had the chance to find mentors, people who had that experience, who had successes. And they gave me the confidence to know that I could do it. Yeah, it might be hard, but it was absolutely possible for me to study abroad in Spain. So I headed over there. It was a month into the experience, and I had been struggling. This happened to be a rainy day. And just picture the beautiful cathedral in the background and the cobblestone streets and no curb cuts. And I went to back off of the sidewalk that I had inadvertently gone up. And on my way back down, my chair hit the angle wrong and I hit the ground, face plant on the cobblestones, wet. A beautiful Spanish people who were leaning over me, trying to help me, and it was literally hitting rock bottom. And I changed all my flights. I was headed home. I knew that I'd been defeated. I couldn't do it. And I ended up on my my week that I had to put everything together before I flew out, sitting on the banks of the Guadalquivir River and having a tinto verano and talking about the experience. And my roommate said, "Aren't things difficult for you at home too?" I said, "Well, yeah, they are." And she said, "Well, wouldn't you rather face those difficulties in a place like this with the beauty all around us and the culture around us?" And that's when I really realized that I had a support system. I had people who were there who could help me through those challenging times. And I think there was a bit more homesickness than there was inaccessibility. And so I changed my flights again. There's the $50 change fee yet again. And I ended up staying 5 months in Spain and learned some really amazing skills about how to push through hardships, but also some simple skills right off the bat. How to say, "My wheelchair is out of battery, can you push me home?" How to say to the bus drivers, "This is how you operate a ramp," and really navigating the country in a way that I didn't think I could do. And now that has led to many international experiences and domestic travel here in the US through my workplace. But it really all started with that trip to Spain.
It seemed like it was kind of a watershed moment for you, as far as like you took on something that it didn't seem possible, that mostly everybody didn't think was possible for you, and then you rocked it.
At the time, it didn't feel like rocking it. At the time, it
But it
felt.
didn't feel like it. Yeah.
But
Yeah, I think that's a really fascinating part about your story. I mean, I had a similar experience, and I think sometimes it can seem like a totally glamorous experience, and maybe even people could experience guilt if you have a failure like that, you fall off a curb, and you just can feel like you just hit rock bottom. But like sometimes, a mentor told me that study abroad involves the best and the worst times of your life, and it's not and so it's cool that you had that nuanced experience, and you kind of rose above it. And I think that's really the way that we experience exchange. But it's an amazing developing experience. And Rob, like, what could you tell us about any international experiences you've had and kind of how they've impacted where you're at?
Yeah. I'd love to kind of piggyback on what Jessica was saying about the importance of support systems and challenge of accessibility, not really just being your own personal experience with accessibility, but kind of learning to navigate the space and being allowed to take challenges yourself. I think that was so important for me. I really wanted to study abroad during my undergraduate program, but I think I was really discouraged one of the first experiences when I was trying to fill out some paperwork for a few international exchange programs, they would directly ask, have you ever been diagnosed with a mental health condition? And when I saw that on paper, I was so kind of repelled from even thinking about doing it, because I had never really thought of that as a barrier for my work. In fact, I often see it as a strength in the way I approach and think about things. But seeing that many countries still don't allow visas, for example, for international exchange if you have a mental related disability, I think that was kind of eye-opening for me and made me step back. And it wasn't really until I, like Jessica, got connected to mentors and heard about other success stories, both from people with my same disability as well as others in the disability community, that I really felt confident enough to start doing more international work outside of the US. My international work and passion for learning about other cultures really started before I had the privilege to leave the country. During my undergraduate studies at the University of Iowa, I volunteered with their Center for Human Rights, focusing on disability issues. And the approach of the center was to look at rights intersectionally, so also to see how issues of injustice are exacerbated by things like race or gender. It's also where I met my wife, who was working on issues related to immigrant justice at the time. And this really helped me get into the field to look at the different ways that culture can impact and shape disability. And I didn't actually study abroad until my graduate studies, where I got to visit both Ireland and Malaysia, including Malaysian Borneo, which really cemented my interest to realize how little I knew about the world around me. And I think what I love about studying abroad is the more I visit or meet people from other countries, I think it makes our own values and customs seem a little more strange or unique. So I think studying abroad for me has been important, not just to learn about other folks, but to learn from those experiences and challenge what we think about our everyday lives as well.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah, I think that's great. I think it shows too that, you kind of got into this a little later, and, you didn't have like a study abroad experience in maybe undergrad, but I think it just goes to show like it's never too late to be kind of thinking about more kind of a more global view in your career. And Jessica, like what kinds of, could you tell us about some experiences you've had where you've kind of been able to take your career more global with Microsoft, some of the opportunities you've had working with in the international sphere?
Yeah, I've been reflecting on this quite a bit. I travel about 6 weeks a year, and a lot of that is domestic travel, but I do have 1 to 2 international trips a year. And I've been now home during kind of my peak travel months, typically, because of the pandemic. And I'm like many people on the call, I really have that itch. I really want to get out there and travel again. And it is something that can be so challenging at the time, and it still is, but still today I have very similar experience to that first trip to Spain, where I long for it, even though it is difficult. I returned back to Spain before working for Microsoft with a PCA, which I know we'll talk about in a little bit. But she said to me something that was interesting. I had just lit up. We were on the train and we were headed to Sevilla, and she said, "How could you be so excited to travel to Spain after you had such difficulty?" And I said, because this place feels like home. Now that I've had those challenges and those successes, I was looking forward to going back to somewhere where we had such a strong connection. The trips now that I work at Microsoft are more of a bit less pleasure, less leisure, and more work, but it creates a really interesting dynamic. So I've seen the highs and the lows. I travel to London every couple of years, and in London, all of the cabs are wheelchair accessible. And this is so important for me as a business professional to be able to show up to a meeting on time, independently and be able to go to lunch with colleagues in an accessible cab. And that somewhat minor difference is something that I can bring home to Seattle, Washington, and I can say to my colleagues here, there is a possibility that we can get around using wheelchair accessible vehicles. Why is this not happening in Seattle, yet we see that in London? Of course, there are the stories that are less maybe inspirational. And I've traveled to Paris and used the metro system, which is not as accessible as one might expect it to be. But I think those opportunities gave me a chance to talk to Parisians, people who are from Paris, day in and day out, and I can talk to them and say, can you please point me in the direction of an elevator? And it is amazing to see the kindness that comes out of strangers when they recognize that their cities aren't accessible to people with disabilities, but they can have a positive role in making that experience for me more accessible. So there's a lot of similarities from that first trip, and I think I'm probably more adept and set up to succeed now that I do it more often with work.
Nice. Thanks, Jessica. And Rob, tell us about some experiences you've been able to be globally engaged in your job.
Sure. Maybe I'll talk about two different ones. The first is one kind of an ongoing one that I think might be useful for other folks on this call, because it's a good way to get involved with international work without having to leave the country, which I think is also a big part about being an international professional. One of my first ways that I got engaged was joining as a personal assistant bank through a local independent living center. So through a local independent living center, I started working as a direct care professional or a personal assistant, depending where you are in the US. We use those terms interchangeably sometimes. And I was basically on a running call list for whenever someone was visiting from another state or sometimes a country that I'd work as a personal assistant. I also became a PA for a close friend who now heads a large international disability organization. And this really gave me a great opportunity to meet people from all around the world, as well as kind of fit an unmet need in our community. Oftentimes, folks, when they are traveling, don't have access to personal assistance, which can be a huge barrier to international travel. And so if you can get involved with your local independent living centers, which are often the ones who kind of have this kind of clearinghouse of information and connectivity to local communities, it's a great way to get involved. And you'll be surprised how many people with disabilities do want to travel and do use services like independent living centers to make that possible. So not necessarily an academic way, but it's really informed my approach and knowledge. In terms of my academic work, one of my most recent experiences has been participating in a US Department of State funded program through the Association of University Centers on Disability, or AUCD. AUCD funds what's called a University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities in each of the US states. And they've been hosting the last few years an exchange program to foster learning about employment for people with disabilities, with exchange from professionals in Eastern African countries and the US. So through this program, I've hosted 4 folks right now, all from Uganda, at our university for learning. And then I've got the chance to go back there and visit to work with their NGOs. So it's been really amazing to work with some disability-run organizations in Uganda, where we provide training and technical assistance, but honestly, most of the time I feel like I'm learning from folks there more than I'm providing a service. That's another story for another day. And it's really just been eye-opening to me to think about what it means to exchange, especially in a mutually beneficial way with folks from other countries. Some of the disability-related challenges that I had to kind of set out for me before going, one of the things that's really critical to maintaining my work is ready connections to my therapist. I actually really thrive and regularly check in with my regularly scheduled telehealth, and having knowing where a good internet connection was twice a week made that trip feasible for me. Also, with my asthma, I had heard quite a bit actually through the Mobility International programs to be prepared for dust, which I knew was going to be a challenge for me with my chronic asthma. So learning from folks on the ground there about how to negotiate and how to navigate it made it much more feasible, and also made for some great conversation points to learn from other local leaders with disabilities when I got there.
Thanks, Rob. That's great. It's that's perfect. Yeah. It's interesting that a lot of your global experience has happened actually within the United States, and actually kind of reminds me, we recently put together a tip sheet on ways people can be more globally concentrated from their homes, which is a great thing to be thinking about right now. Jessica, moving on to you, I think kind of Robert sort of covered this next question that we're on, but for you, like how has your disability impacted or not impacted your work? And more importantly, what strategies or reasonable accommodations have helped you to be successful?
Well, I love what Rob just said about PAs, and he's describing a person with a disability helping another person with a disability. And I just love that concept because it really highlights that the disability is a strength. When I was traveling a couple years ago now, I was in DC, so domestically, but same applies even more so internationally. I had a meeting with Congress, so I was prepared. I called the taxi a day in advance, made sure that they were there to pick me up 2 hours in advance, and I waited and I waited, and the cab did not show up. So I went up to the counter. I said, I need to get to this meeting. They pointed me in the direction of the metro. I grabbed a map, hopped on the metro. I got off about a mile short of where I needed to be. I walked a mile in the rain and showed up for my meeting with Congress only an hour late. Everybody in the room froze when I walked in the door. They turned and looked, and I was sopping wet, a hot mess, mascara running down my face, pools of water in my shoes. And I thought to myself, what if this had been a job interview? Would I have gotten the job? Probably not, because I was being judged for the inaccessible world around me. But instead, the way that we should look at those experiences is that I was resourceful enough to find my way to the metro, determined enough to walk through the rain for a mile, and persistent enough to show up with wet feet to this meeting. And that is the type of strength that we should see in people with disabilities. And even though the inaccessibility of the world can really impact how we show up, when we own that narrative and talk about the strengths that we have, I think we can go a long way to remove the barriers that exist out there in the physical world. Some of the strategies, I think this is really important. This story of me being in DC without the cab reflects the planfulness that I think is really important. And I know that's not a word, but it's a word we use in the tech industry. Being very planful, being planned in advance to make sure that you have a plan B, that you have all of the information you need to be successful, regardless of the potential inaccessibility that might be out there. At Microsoft, we do have a centralized accommodation fund. This is a pool of money that is not tied to my team's budget. So when I request an accommodation, my manager never sees that cost. And traveling with a personal care attendant like I do, traveling with someone who is on the flight with me, sometimes very expensive flights, someone who needs a hotel room, they need food throughout the week, they need to receive a salary, all of those prices really add up. And all of that cost comes from a centralized budget. So if my manager needs to make a decision about my performance, she is not making that based on how expensive I am. It's all insulated. So that's a system that we've set up, and we're continuing to learn from it. As we continue to hire more and more people with disabilities, there's always new learnings. Right now we have a program where we have hired 4 full-time ASL interpreters because we were seeing that the pool of interpreters just wasn't enough for the number of deaf people that are working in Microsoft. So we're learning and we're playing with that model and making sure that our employees are always supported. The same goes for our visual assistants, for our blind employees. Right now we have a pool, but we're realizing that the skill set is really important to hone in. So we're actively looking and researching ways to build a skill set of someone who serves as a visual assistant. So there are some things we have the answers to, and I think a lot of things that we need to continue to learn from people with disabilities to grow in the right way.
Jessica, what's your favorite part about your job?
My favorite part, people. Yeah, I think the nature of my job, strategic partnerships, kind of says it all. I work with people with disabilities globally, and sometimes I meet people who have overcome huge barriers in their countries, but really there is this consistent thread amongst people with disabilities who are trying to do the very best with what they have. And they're developing skills to articulate what it is that they need. And when I understand what they need, what they want, what they wish technology to do for them, I can bring that to Microsoft. And then our products are better for everyone. I think one of the stories that I always reflect on was last year I was in Brussels and I met a guy named Alex who has quadriplegia and uses a power chair. And I showed him the Xbox adaptive controller. So this isn't work related, this is fun related, but I think we should be able to have fun too. And we were playing with the adaptive controller, and we were playing a game with another guy who was blind. And Alex was tapping the switch so that he could make the player jump. I was using Copilot, so I had the other functions on my device. And Alex was calling out to the visual descriptions to the player who was blind. And this collaboration that we had, that was one of my favorite moments that I've had at Microsoft, to see how people with disabilities can come together, show our strengths, and have fun, because we all want to have fun too.
Heck yeah. Rob, what about you? What's your favorite part about your job?
Tough to follow that. That's such a cool story, because I think, like Jessica, I see disability as a strength and definitely a sense of community as well. Working in an interdisciplinary university too, my community includes educators, academics, other professionals, and even some really cool artists and performance artists. So seeing kind of the broad range of people involved in disability is definitely one of my favorite parts. My job changes frequently, both day to day and year to year. If I had to pick, I guess, one favorite thing is really the people side, the students and others passionate about learning or experiencing disability. And in the spring and summer especially, it tends to be times where I'm really more socially prone and I really crave social ties and connecting to others. It's also usually the time I travel. I was supposed to spend most of the summer both in Slovakia and then to Eastern Africa. So it's a little tough not to be able to have those ties. But what's cool about my work is that I really do get to keep up with people from around the world, which can be difficult now, but exchange is possible, as Justin, as you said, even when you're in the local level. So using really cool apps like WhatsApp, which is really big outside of the US, in recent weeks, I've been able to have chats with friends from Korea, Uganda, Zimbabwe, and Bangladesh in the last week alone. So I'm thankful to stay connected because of technology right now, even in the weird situation we're in.
Excellent. Excellent. And Rob, what's the most challenging part of your job?
Yeah, I really love my job, and I think I'm pretty privileged in that sense that even the challenges in themselves are exciting to me, because if it was too easy or too boring or stayed the same, I don't think I'd love it.
No way.
But the pressure oftentimes can be pretty intense. Oftentimes in academia, you're pulled in many different directions at once, and it's hard sometimes not to compare yourself to others. And idealistically, you can tune out the noise, but at the end of the day, you often are judged or get to keep your job based on production. So the question is more what or how you are producing. One of my calming mantras that I often tell myself is that I am more than my productivity, and my value is much more than the things that I'm judged on. So kind of remembering to think about what's valuable to myself and the community of people that I work with is a way that I kind of can navigate that sort of challenge and pressure.
Jessica, what do you think about that? What Rob just said, and also what for you? What do you think is the most challenging part of your job?
Yeah, Rob, I hear you. I feel the pressure too. There is a lot of work to still be done. I think we've made a lot of advancements in accessible technology, but there's still so much to do. And every time a person with a screen reader reaches out and says they're having a hard time using our products, it's devastating for that split second. And then we stop and we say, okay, what can we learn from this experience to make it better for everyone? This shift to digital, even more so, I think we're seeing those challenges bubble to the surface that we might not have seen before, specifically digital events. So I run a event in the Seattle area every year for people with disabilities and accessibility practitioners to come together. Well, you might not be surprised, but we're sure not meeting in person this year. So we've moved that entire event to a digital format, and making sure that we are leaning into the number one objective of this event, which is to be the most accessible event on the planet. And that's hard to do when you're working with a lot of unknowns. So I think what I've learned here during the pandemic that we have right now is that people with disabilities are the subject matter experts when it comes to a lot of these new experiences for others. Many people are feeling isolated right now. Many people are needing to adapt to a new normal, but that's what we do best. People with disabilities are really good at adapting to the unknown. We're really good at navigating and troubleshooting situations that aren't accessible. And I find that a lot of us are also the first adopters for technology. So when you're on your Zoom call and you are needing captioning, this captioning functionality is something that people who are deaf and hard of hearing have created. So when we listen to people with disabilities, we create some really cool things. Within our product teams, we have AI captioning built in. We also have the background blur, which was created by this really brilliant engineer who is deaf, and she doesn't use sign language to communicate. So she spends a lot of time and energy focusing on reading captions and focusing on people's facial expressions and lip reading. And that's really hard to do. So Swetha, her name, Swetha said, why don't we create a black background blur so I can focus just on the person's mouth? We were like, this is a fantastic idea. We floated that with the deaf community and they said, well, let's pull it back a little bit because we also need people's facial expressions and we need to see hands and motion. So we created this background blur really with and by the disability community. And now it's something that people use when they have a kid running in the background, or they have a messy bedroom that they are recording from, or a closet in Rob's case. But I think that this shift to digital is really going to bring out and float to the surface a lot of challenges that people with disabilities face, but a lot of the ways in which we've already adapted and figured out a lot of answers to.
Justin, can I just piggyback on that for a second?
Yes, I couldn't have said it better myself.
So eloquently said about how much we can look to people with disabilities as design experts right now, because so many accommodations or struggles for accommodations, I think, are becoming the norm for so many people. There's this awesome scholar at Vanderbilt University, Their name is Amy Humray. And just to summarize, they said that there's an irony right now that accommodations that many people with disabilities have really struggled and fought for are suddenly, possible or even required when everyone needs them. And I think there's a lot of access specialization, especially for remote learning, that we can see from the disability community. I know for my students, for example, I teach large lectures. I had 2 nights to switch from my 200-person class from in-person to online. And I really looked amongst my team of teaching assistants. I have the honor not only to teach the class, but my teaching assistants all identify as persons with disabilities who use technology in different ways, which was the strength to look at the different kind of multimodal ways that we can use education platforms and make them more accessible, because of course not everyone learns in the same way. So yeah, well said, Jessica.
Nice. And kind of moving on here to the next question, I think there can be, you guys have kind of been touching on some of the challenges that you face in the workplace. And I imagine, people listening to this call are thinking, how can I get into this though? And I think we did have some questions from registrants about like, how do you disclose your disability to employers? How do you kind of deal with employer doubts if you've ever had them? So I wonder if maybe we could start with Jessica, if you have any tips for a person with a disability kind of aspiring to get into a global career.
Yeah, absolutely. I think about really 3 areas. First, be very specific. Define your goals. Put it out there. What is the goal that you are trying to seek, the role that you want to be a part of? Network in that field and ask a lot of questions, because the second one is to be curious, especially in times like this when we're home and we have a lot of right now free and discounted opportunities to educate ourselves. Content from lynda.com or pick your favorite training platform to really beef up your skill set and be curious and do that. The third is be bold. And this is something that I think I've learned from that experience in Spain. Go out, ask for mentorship, ask for a virtual coffee date or an informational interview. And with each person you meet, ask them if they have a recommendation for that next person to connect with, and that will continue to build your network. While you're doing these things, create that narrative for what disability means to you. Articulate the ways in which, for you specifically, disability is a strength for you. Because there will come a point in time, whether it's a non-apparent or apparent disability, when you need to share that information, whether it's asking for an accommodation or if you roll into the room like I do. Being the owner of that narrative so that people don't come up with their own story is really important. During one of my early roles, I had an executive tell me that he was reluctant to hire me because he was worried that the desks were too low and the doors were too heavy. Now, the unemployment rate for people with disabilities is twice that of the national average. I was told by a different executive, a different organization, that I could never be promoted because I couldn't travel independently. I think the last hour we've spent together will tell you that that is not the case. But that type of misperception has led to a wage gap of 63 cents to the dollar for people with disabilities. But if I would have owned that narrative and explained why I can travel, then there wouldn't have been this awkward moment where he made a decision based on my potential that was inaccurate. I think there are some resources that you can look to as well. If anything that I'm telling you about Microsoft is interesting, you can check out our hiring page. We're always looking for people with disabilities. We're always looking for that talent. The website is microsoft.com/inclusive-hiring. If you have feedback about the products, what we're doing, you can send those over to our Disability Answer Desk, or DAD as we like to call it. And that website is aka.ms/dad. So please keep your feedback coming in and don't be afraid to be bold.
Thanks, Jessica. What do you think about that, Rob? Tips, suggestions?
Sure. I think Jessica and I are mind melding from halfway across the US right now, because I think Be Bold really strikes a chord with what I wanted to share about. Actually, a lot of my research is on the why people do or do not disclose disabilities, and some of those challenges, especially for people with invisible disabilities. One of the things that we see from the research most often is that fear of rejection or fear of disrupting organizational practices is often what holds people back from asking for what they need to be successful. There is stigma, and oftentimes that disclosure process, it can be a barrier. But if you don't ask, you won't receive what you need. And why it could be a challenge to do that and to get up the confidence to request an accommodation. And remember, accommodation, we all use them. So we call them sometimes different words, like reasonable accommodations when we're talking about disability. But accommodation is just changing a process or a procedure or a way of doing something. So when we think about it in that terms, I think hopefully it becomes a little bit less scary or kind of in the ether. In terms of recommending for an aspiring global professional, I think it's really important to start by being curious. Learn about the places you want to go, and also learn about learning. There's an element of cultural competence that you shouldn't go in assuming you know more about a place or that an approach is wrong or different. If you go in willing to learn, I think you'll often come back with more out of an experience than you expected. And you also don't need to reinvent the wheel for both this curiosity as well as the ability to learn about how you see your disability as a strength. Look for those mentors, look for those wonderful blog posts that are out there. I mean, they didn't pay me to say this, but Mobility International has a lot of really awesome blog posts from folks with disabilities that have done these experiences before, both in terms of disclosing their work and disclosing for international exchange. And you can learn from others to really, hopefully, rethink disability as a strength, and also to hopefully find your individual strengths as well.
All great suggestions. And we're at this point now where if there are any questions from the audience, you're welcome to bring those to our attention. One of the questions from the registrants was for how practitioners can support people with disabilities to pursue global careers. And so that question was focusing on disability practitioners and career center personnel or rehabilitation counselors. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is Jessica. I think the research can be intensive, and there's a lot of unknowns out there when it comes to international travel that can be really overwhelming. People with disabilities, anyone has life to live that they may not have the time and resources to investigate what it takes to have an international job. I think folks that are helping people with disabilities acquire that next step, if you can help them in a few ways, research potential barriers that there are in that international role and help them come up with a series of prioritized solutions to that. And then what we also talked about earlier, which is the narrative. It's always great to have someone to bounce your narrative off of. When you start talking about your disability, talk about it with someone you can trust, who can give you feedback on how that could potentially be perceived, and continue to work on it. I don't think you're ever finished understanding what disability means to you, and don't feel free to just keep working on it. Does that help?
Perfect. Any, let's see, Monica, do you see any questions from the audience?
I don't see any questions yet.
All right.
If anybody has any questions, I know we just have a few minutes, but if anybody wants to put their questions in the chat box.
How
So
can you
someone
become
is
a partner
asking,
with Microsoft specializing in accessibility? That's a question just came up.
What do you mean by partner?
Good question.
Lots of definitions for partner. I'll share a few of them. So if you're a nonprofit, an NGO organization, you can come on through My Way. If you are a person with a disability who uses our technology, I noticed there was a comment there about Outlook. That's exactly the type of feedback that we're looking for. So you can send that through to our Disability Answer Desk.
How do you find international jobs? Sounds like maybe that might be like networks, places to look for. What do you guys think?
One thing is don't pigeonhole yourself into just looking at disability jobs, or say that jobs just for people with disabilities. There's a lot of really awesome international exchange networks, especially if you're in your early career. There's a lot of teach and study abroad programs. A lot of them are sponsored by the US Department of State. And those are a great entryway into more international careers.
Excellent. It's also a great point, time to mention too, that Mobility International USA has some great resources on our website. We actually have another project called EDI, and I can't remember off the top of my head what it stands for, but it's a group of international development organizations all around the world. And if you look up on our website, I'll share the link with all of you afterwards. There's a list of EDI organizations that are our partners. And you can find many more international development organizations through Interaction, which they have a job board. There's various other job boards as well. We have an article where we actually share some of those job board resources. So I'll make sure to include some of that info in the follow-up email. I've had questions from people with disabilities, and I think there were a couple of registrants that asked this about opportunities to work remotely, and it's kind of, I guess, an opportune time to ask about this, but I've actually seen these questions even before. I've known people with disabilities who found remote work to be a beneficial accommodation. What do you guys think about that? If there's a way to like negotiate that as an accommodation, or a way to sort of find opportunities of where jobs that can already be done remotely.
One thing to make sure is that when you're offering work is to talk about your specific skills and what you can add. I think as an accommodation, I think remote work is going to be all of a sudden much more common for a lot of people. But really finding your strengths and really diving in, if you're trying to volunteer or find work with an organization, what your specific skills are and how they match or can benefit is helpful. I think sometimes I see this even with my students, with some very eagerness and excitement to get into international work, but without necessarily doing the legwork to figure out what can be offered. So be willing and flexible to learn new skills, I think, is a huge part of being an asset for international work.
Jessica, any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Rob. I think what's really interesting, we're all going to be monitoring this real time, is this might be part of the COVID silver lining, is that more people are becoming comfortable with the technology that empowers that remote work. And I think it's going to be more difficult for employers to argue that a position cannot be at least some percentage of that role remote, because we're really building the case study right now. We're building the proof points that people can be successful. I think flexibility on both sides is going to really change the culture of remote work as well.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you. And I haven't heard any other questions. So, and we are 4 past the hour now. So with that, I just want to thank our panelists and all of you all for joining us. Our captions, ACS for providing captions, Audrey for providing the interpretation. It's been a great discussion today. I will be sending a follow-up email soon with information on how you can access a recording and a transcript, and also with some follow-up career resources as well. So for anybody who's interested in continuing to pursue this. And also I would encourage you to continue also to follow our Global Careers project this year, we are focusing on global careers. We do plan to have another panel discussion, and we also will be having some more resources added to our website about this. So I hope you'll subscribe to our Access to Exchange newsletter and to keep up with us to learn more as those opportunities and resources are released. So with that, everybody, have a great week. Stay safe and stay healthy. And it's been a real pleasure having this conversation. Have a great week.
Thank you. Thanks, Justin. Thanks, Rob.
Bye.
Bye.